Hey everybody, it's week 16 here at the Victory Garden, and I think this week we're just going to take a look around and see if anything new needs to be talked about or looked at. And we've also been hearing from you a lot in the last week that you are overrun with tomatoes, either cherry tomatoes or your slicer tomatoes are just going super well. We've also heard people say that kale is a really great plant and grows super well. So they're wondering maybe what else can I do with my kale. So we are going to, like I said, take a little look in the garden, and then we're going to talk a little bit more about what to do with those tomatoes and kale that you are overrun with.
I wanted to just take a quick look at the winter squash with you. We have some really big fruits on here, and you might remember just a couple weeks ago this plant was just overrunning this part of the garden. And as you can see, the inner part of the plant here is starting to die back. So that's a cue to me that the winter squash will be ripening up their fruits. So this is a butternut squash, and there's some really nice fruits on it here. They are not ready to harvest yet. And normally with the winter squash, you'll just want to wait till either the plant dies back fully or after a first frost, or if we're going to get a really heavy frost or a deep freeze, then you want to harvest them and bring them in. But usually what happens is, if you look at the stem of the fruit will no longer be kind of green and juicy. It'll have dried up and shriveled up, and it'll be brown. And so for sure, you want to make sure that you're not harvesting before that stage, so that they can fully ripen on the vine. And these still have a little bit of time left, but like I said, this butternut plant is kind of nearing the end of its life. On the other hand, over here we have some buttercup, and those are still looking very, very green. They're not quite dying back yet. And we've been talking a little bit about seed saving, so I also want to point out that a lot of winter squash and zucchini and pumpkins they can cross-pollinate each other, so you have to be careful when you save the seeds. But the butternut squash is a machado, and the buttercup squash is a maxima, and those two won't cross, and those are the only ones we have of those varieties, and so we actually would be able to save the seeds from both of these.
Alright, so we were just looking at some different varieties of winter squash, and now we're going to look at some different varieties of kale. So here in our Victory Garden, and our Victory Garden raised bed, we've got 3 different kinds of kale. So we have this flat-leafed lacinato kale, and I think that might be what a decent amount of people got in their Victory Garden tray. So this is a pretty common form of kale. There's also curly kale, and this can come in like green, or sometimes it can be purplish. So just this nice, really ruffly kale that can be attractive as just like an edging plant, or also great for eating. And here is red Russian kale, and you can see it has this purple mid-vein stem, and then it's kind of a bigger leaf. So just within the kale family, there's a lot of different just like physical differences that you can see. And then also, depending on how you want to cook them, some varieties might be better. So the flatter ones are usually a little bit nicer if you just want to have them on a sandwich, or just cut them up thinly and kind of add them to a like loose leaf salad mix. Otherwise, these curly kales I think are the best for if you're doing soup. You can cut them up, and even when you're boiling them, they still retain a lot of their texture. So I think that, yeah, there's a lot of different options depending on what you're looking for. And in the future, when you're selecting plants to grow in the summer, a good idea might be thinking about like, what does your family like to eat, or what do you like to eat, and then which varieties are going to be really good for that. As far as something you can do with kale, I did make some kale chips with my kale yesterday. So kale chips are, I think, a really common thing that you can do with kale. So I just had some extra lacinato kale, and I just kind of rough chopped it up and tossed it in a little bit of like sunflower oil, and put a little bit of salt and pepper, and then I put it on a sheet tray, and put it in a 400-degree oven, and it took maybe 15 minutes. I stirred them 2 times during that 15 minutes, and then took them out, and they're nice and crunchy and a great snack and a great way to use up a ton of kale. It really condenses down. Sue, do you have anything that you really like to do with kale?
Yeah, I like to eat raw kale in a salad, but when I'm going to do that, I usually massage it with olive oil, and that's exactly what it sounds like. You just take the leaf off of the stem and you put it in, you know, a bowl or something with olive oil, and you literally sort of massage the leaf. It just makes it a much nicer texture in your salad, and then you can just do a kale salad, or you can add it to another salad. Actually, and another thing I really like to do is chop it up. And again, you always want to take it off the stem. The stems are not very palatable. I like to rough chop it and then saute it with just with onions and garlic, and then add some nuts. And I really enjoy kale that way as well.
Yeah, so never fear, there's a lot of different options for you to get more kale in your diet. Kale is super healthy, and if you find that you still have way too much kale, you can always give it to your neighbors, or you can take it to the food shelf.
Right. Oh, and here's the thing too, just so you all know, I mean, the kale plant will keep really late into the fall, and it actually even gets a little tastier as the weather gets cooler. So, you know, you don't need to feel like you have to harvest it all and eat it while the weather is warm.
And here we have a little sample of another crop that has a ton of variety in the fruit. So these are some tomatoes, and full disclosure, not all of these tomatoes are growing in our Victory Garden. So the ones that are growing in the Victory Garden are, we've got these cherries. So you may have some similar varieties, and they are a little bit bigger than your typical cherry tomato, but they are like a nice uniform kind of color and shape, and I've heard that people are just having really a lot of success with those plants. And we've also got just like a red slicer tomato. So this is kind of this nice like palm-sized tomato that is usually, it's a little bit firm right now, it's a little teensy bit underripe, but that might be really nice for slicing up for a sandwich where it's not just going to squish everywhere. So just some nice, you know, fairly reliable uniform varieties. And then I did bring in a few of the just interesting varieties that I'm growing on my farm. And a few of them are heirloom varieties. So in the heirlooms you can get just this endless spectrum of color, of sizes. The flavor profiles can just go from, you know, they can go from a bland, really productive, you know, like stewing tomato, to a really sweet tomato or really acidic tomato. And I think one of the really popular heirloom varieties is this Cherokee Purple. So this one's cool. It's a little bit, so it's a little bit darker purplish red on the bottom, and then it tends to remain a little green on top. But this, I think, is just a really popular heirloom tomato because it has a really great flavor and just good size and good productivity. And then I brought in this orange tomato because you can get into orange, yellow, you know, you can get tomatoes that ripen fully green. So there's a lot of options there. This orange one is an heirloom variety called Moonglow. I got it from Seed Savers Exchange, and this tomato we really like because it's really productive, and it's this gorgeous, vibrant orange color when it's ripe, and it also has just a really good flavor. It has a really good balance of sweetness and acidity, and it just mixing a little bit of an orange tomato and a red tomato in like a salad or just any sort of dish just adds that extra visual pop. And again, we've got right here just a little yellow grape tomato, cherry tomato, and yeah, just kind of fun for color. And then when we get into really colorful varieties, we've got, this one is a vernissage, so it's actually a striped tomato. So that one is pretty attractive, although the size is kind of halfway between a slicer and a cherry. And then finally I got this dark galaxy tomato, which is just a really unique looking tomato, and this one is just a stunning visual centerpiece. although the flavor is not quite, it's a little more subdued than some of the other tomatoes. There's a lot of different options for what to do if you find yourself with way too many tomatoes. So obviously fresh eating is a good way. Just quarter them up, and you can toss them with a little bit of like olive oil or balsamic vinegar. You can mix them into your cold salads, mix them into your pasta salads, your lettuce salads. Just really put tomatoes in everything. If you find yourself with too many tomatoes to eat fresh and you want to do some preservation, there's a lot of different options for how to put your tomatoes up for the winter. A lot of quick ways where you can just get them into the freezer. And Sue, did you want to talk about one of the ways that you like to preserve tomatoes?
Yeah, well, I tend to be, so busy in the summer, and I'm just kind of a lazy person. But so I just want to remind you that, like, literally you can just core them and throw them in a good freezer bag and throw them in the freezer. So, and the nice thing about doing that is that if you have, one or two tomatoes that you aren't eating, that you're not gonna, eat before they go bad, you could just throw them in there and keep adding to that bag. So it's a good way to just sort of keep up with them as they're coming in. So truthfully, I tend to do that, and then I'll cook with them in the winter. One of my favorite things to do with them in the winter is I'll saute up some onions and garlic in olive oil, and I'll get the pan real hot, and I'll throw the frozen tomatoes in there and boil off all the water so that it gets to be a real kind of thick, it's almost not a sauce, it's almost more like a paste, but it's got the onions and garlic in there, and it actually goes really fast if you are just doing, one bag of frozen tomatoes at a time, and that makes a really nice, topper for pasta or whatever in the winter. Yeah, so I would urge you to not feel overwhelmed by your tomatoes, but throw them in the freezer.
So one of the things that you can do, and I will say that we in the past 4 days harvested about 1.5 bushels of tomatoes that are all cracked, and we're not going to be able to eat them fast enough, and we're not going to be able to sell them. So I will also show you some of this cracking on the tomatoes. We had gotten all that water for the month of July, and then it's been a little bit dry the last 2 weeks. So we were really inconsistent with watering our tomato plants, so that caused a lot of the fruits to crack. So then we harvested as many as we could, and now we're back to our watering schedule. So the fruit should go back to being these nice, like, unblemished, uncracked fruits. But what we're going to do with all of our cracked fruits is we're actually going to can them. And I would say tomatoes, like crushed tomatoes, and pickles are probably the 2 easiest or most common things to can. So if you are thinking about getting into canning, I think that's a really good, like, safe option, especially if you follow, there's a USDA produced home canning guide, and that is amazing. It will walk you through every single step of how to can things. So that is one option, and it does take a little bit of time to prepare, so it isn't as fast as just throwing them in the freezer bag, which can be super nice, but I like it because it doesn't take up freezer space. So we are going to take all of our tomatoes, and we're going to follow this USDA approved recipe. So we're going to cut them all up, we're going to stew them down, put them in the cans, and just get them canned tonight. And that's going to be pretty exciting, a good way to use up our total overload of tomatoes. But otherwise, I have frozen sauce before, and not even worried about canning it. Sometimes if I have a bunch of different vegetables ready all at once, I'll stew down tomatoes, peppers, onions, some zucchini, garlic, and whatever fresh herbs I have around, basil or oregano, and I'll stew that down until it gets to be a really nice thick sauce, and then I'll just portion that up and just freeze it in quart bags. And that can be kind of nice because you don't have to worry about canning it, but then you can also just pull that out and make it into a pizza sauce or pasta sauce or a soup then sometime in the winter. And a final thing to note about tomatoes is we've been talking about a lot of different styles of tomatoes or types. So we're calling these ones slicing tomatoes, we're calling these ones grape tomatoes or cherry tomatoes, and then another common type is a paste tomato. And though they may all be a little bit nicer for certain applications, the paste tomato might be a little bit nicer to make a thick sauce, and the slicers are a little bit juicier and nicer, you know, to have just fresh on a sandwich. You can use them all interchangeably. There's no need to be super concerned. If you find yourself with a lot of cherry tomatoes, you can make a sauce out of those. Or if you need a good tomato for a salad, but all you've got is paste tomatoes, they are completely fine to use in any way. So definitely just want to make a note to not get too concerned about what exact type of tomato you have. All right, so hopefully this conversation on different varieties has gotten you thinking, gotten your interest a little bit piqued, and we will say that it's never too early to start thinking about what cool varieties you want to grow next year, especially while you're in the heat of the summer and you're eating your fresh vegetables. Maybe you're wishing that you had something that tasted a little different, or you're wishing you had more of something, or maybe even less of something. Unfortunately, sorry zucchini. So I just brought a few seed catalogs here, and we're going to pin some resources to the comments section and just share with you some of our top seed companies we like to look at. Some of these, one of these companies in particular, I just really like to look at the varieties. They have so many different kinds. So it's just fun to see all of the options that are out there. And this is something that now is a good time because you can request catalogs sent to you for free from these different seed companies, and they're going to send them to you periodically throughout the season. It's always really exciting around Christmas time. They like to send out the next year's seed catalogs, so it's something to look forward to in the winter is when you get those catalogs and you just look through them, see all of the myriad varieties, and start dreaming about the next summer. So never too early to start thinking about that. And
I guess it was a few weeks ago I was talking about keeping notes and keeping records, and this kind of goes really hand in hand with that, because it's like Sal was saying, if you do feel like you have too much of something or not enough of something, it's really a good idea to write it down, so that next year when you're planning your garden you don't forget.
Yeah, so I think that's it for this week. Again, if you've got any questions or comments, please feel free to post them below and we will answer them. Or check out the Facebook page. It's going super strong, and a lot of cool pictures from everybody, and just a lot of good community building and just kind of getting to know all of the other victory gardeners in the area. So I think we'll end it at that, and we'll see you next week. Bye.
Bye.